30 years of loyalty, gone in an instant, but the real surprise was yet to come. Margaret had spent most of her life working at Lancaster's Diner. One of the oldest restaurants in town, it wasn't just a job for her, it was home. She had built friendships with customers, mentored young waitresses, and had been the silent force keeping the place running, even in the toughest times. But times had changed. The once warm and welcoming diner had fallen under the grip of strict rules and ruthless management. At the center of it all was Ethan Carter. Young, ambitious, and utterly heartless. For him, efficiency mattered more than people. He enforced rigid rules, kept employees under constant pressure, and punished even the smallest mistakes. Margaret had been doing this job for years, and watching Ethan strip the place of its warmth and soul was painful. But today, everything was about to change. Kindness sometimes comes at a price. That evening, a gust of wind carried the scent of rain as the diner's door creaked open. An old man, dressed in worn-out clothes, stepped inside. His tattered coat was soaked from the rain, his hands trembled, and his face was hidden behind a rough beard. Most customers shot him quick, uncomfortable glances before turning back to their meals. But Margaret noticed something in his eyes. He wasn't just hungry. There was something else, maybe the silent cry of a soul that had lost all hope. Without hesitation, she walked up to him. "Are you okay?" she asked gently. The man hesitated, then swallowed hard and whispered, "I just need some food. I don't have any money, but I can wash dishes if you let me." His voice was fragile, as if he hadn't spoken to anyone in a long time. Margaret sighed. The rules were clear, no free meals. But sometimes, rules needed to be broken. She gave him a warm smile. "Take a seat. I'll bring you something hot." A few minutes later, she returned with a steaming bowl of chicken soup and a fresh slice of bread. The man stared at the food for a moment before picking up the spoon with his shaking hands. Then, he began eating slowly at first, then with desperate hunger. For a brief moment, Margaret felt at peace. But that peace didn't last. Because someone was standing behind her. Ethan Carter. His face was red with fury, arms crossed, eyes filled with disgust. "What the hell do you think you're doing, Margaret?" he growled. Margaret flinched but stood her ground. "He's just hungry, Ethan," she said calmly, firmly. "It's just a bowl of soup." Ethan let out a cruel laugh. "This is a business, not a charity. The rules are clear. No free food. Period." Margaret clenched her fists. But enough. Ethan took a step forward and yanked the apron off her waist. "You're fired." The diner fell into dead silence. The other employees froze. Customers watched in shock. Margaret's world crumbled in an instant. "This can't be happening," she whispered. "I gave 30 years to this place." Ethan shrugged. "Big mistake. You're too emotional, Margaret. And honestly, you're too old for this job. Now get out." Margaret blinked, trying to swallow the rage and heartbreak rising in her throat. She glanced at the man still eating his soup. And in his eyes, she saw something. Not just gratitude. Something else. Something that sent a strange shiver down her spine. Like he was testing her. But testing her for what? That question echoed in her mind as she stepped out into the rain. The storm had grown stronger now, and Margaret let the raindrops hide the tears slipping down her face. What she didn't know was that by tomorrow, her entire life would change. An unexpected call the next morning, an eerie emptiness settled over her. For the first time in 30 years, she had nowhere to go. She made herself a cup of coffee, stirring it absent-mindedly in an old mug, when she noticed something at her doorstep: a letter. On the front, only one line was written: "I owe you an apology. Meet me at Lancaster's Diner at noon." Mr. Lancaster. Margaret's breath caught. "Mr. Lancaster?" The real owner of the diner? The man who had been absent for years while Ethan ran the place. Where had he been all this time? She stood frozen, holding the letter. Was this a trap? Or was it really an explanation? Her curiosity got the best of her. She had to go. The truth is revealed when she arrived at the diner. The atmosphere was tense. Employees whispered among themselves, exchanging uneasy glances. Ethan's office door was open, and a shadow stepped out. Ethan Carter. But this time, there was no arrogance on his face. No smug confidence. He looked pale. Shaken. For a second, his eyes met Margaret's. Something was wrong. Ethan stormed past her, shoving the door as he left. The man who had once been untouchable now looked afraid. Margaret turned toward the office and saw him. Mr. Lancaster. But he wasn't what she expected. Gone was the sharp business suit. Instead, he wore a simple jacket. Yet, his eyes were just as piercing as she remembered. As Margaret stepped inside, his lips curved into the faintest smile. And then, he said something that made her freeze in place. "You remember that homeless man you fed last night?" Lancaster asked. "That was me." Margaret's world tilted. "What?" Lancaster continued, "I disguised myself to see how my employees truly behaved." He nodded slowly. "And your kindness spoke louder than Ethan's cruelty ever could." Margaret's eyes widened. This was a test. Lancaster rose from his chair. "I fired Ethan," he said calmly. "But I still need someone to run this diner. Margaret, would you take the job?" Margaret's heart pounded. She had just been fired from this place. And now, she was being offered the chance to run it. Her throat tightened. She thought about the 30 years she had poured into this place. She lifted her chin. "Yes," she said. "I'll bring this diner back to what it was meant to be." And that day, Margaret didn't just reclaim a job. She won the greatest victory of her life. A diner, a life, and a test. Margaret had spent 30 years at Lancaster's diner. This small but cozy place had become a symbol of the town. Construction workers came in for breakfast, office employees grabbed their lunch here, and elderly couples stopped by in the evenings for a warm cup of coffee. For them, Margaret wasn't just a waitress, she was a friend, a confidant, a part of their lives. But times had changed. A new management had taken over. The diner, once filled with warmth and laughter, had turned into a cold, rule-driven business where efficiency mattered more than people. And at the center of it all was Ethan Carter. Ethan was young and ruthless. He imposed strict rules, keeping the employees under constant pressure. The friendly, flexible atmosphere had vanished, replaced by a rigid and soulless workplace. For Margaret, this diner was more than just a job. It was her second home. But in this new system, people like her had no place. She either had to adapt or disappear. The calm before the storm that day, Margaret was going about her usual routine, cleaning tables, helping the younger employees in the kitchen. She was tired, but her heart was still full of kindness. The diner was about to close when the door creaked open. An old man stepped inside. His clothes were worn and soaked from the rain. His shoulders slumped, his steps were slow, and his hands trembled. His face was hidden behind a thick beard, but his eyes. There was something in his eyes. Margaret had seen many homeless people before. But there was something different about this man. Pain. Exhaustion. Maybe even a lost soul. Some customers threw him quick, uncomfortable glances before turning away, pretending he wasn't there. But Margaret didn't hesitate. She walked right up to him. "Are you okay, sir?" she asked gently. The man swallowed hard. "I just need something to eat. I don't have any money. But I can wash dishes to pay for it." Margaret's chest tightened. The rules were clear. No free food. No money, no service. Rules must be followed at all times. But this wasn't just some random man. This was a hungry man. Cold, desperate, alone. She listened to her heart. She decided to break the rules. "Sit down," she said with a warm smile. "I'll bring you some hot soup." She went to the kitchen and filled a bowl with steaming chicken soup. She placed a freshly toasted slice of bread on the side. The man stared at the food for a moment. And then, slowly, he started eating. Margaret felt a deep sense of peace. But that peace didn't last long. The nightmare begins. A sharp voice sliced through the air behind her. "What the hell do you think you're doing, Margaret?" Ethan Carter. His arms were crossed, his eyes burning with anger. Margaret flinched but didn't step back. "He's just hungry, Ethan. It's just a bowl of soup." Ethan let out a cruel laugh. "This is a business, not a charity." Margaret clenched her fists. "But we're humans," she shot back. "And sometimes, we need to look beyond the rules." Ethan's face hardened. He hated being challenged. He stepped forward and, with a swift motion, yanked the apron from Margaret's waist. "You're not anymore," he said, his voice ice cold. "You're fired." The diner went silent. Every employee stood frozen. Customers watched in stunned silence. Margaret's heart sank. 30 years. Erased in an instant. Outside, the rain poured harder. As she walked away from the diner, a storm of emotions swirled inside her: anger, heartbreak, disappointment. What she didn't know was that by tomorrow, everything would change. An unexpected letter. The next morning, Margaret found a letter at her door. It had only one sentence written on it. "I owe you an apology. Meet me at Lancaster's diner at noon." Mr. Lancaster. Margaret's breath caught. Mr. Lancaster. The real owner of the diner, the man who had been absent for years while Ethan ran things. Why was he reaching out now? And why did he want to see her? Her curiosity won. She had to go. The big reveal. When she arrived at the diner, the tension in the air was thick. Employees whispered to one another, exchanging nervous glances. Ethan's office door was open. Inside sat Mr. Lancaster. But he didn't look how she remembered him. The sharp business suit was gone. Instead, he wore a simple, old jacket. As Margaret stepped inside, he gave her a small, knowing smile. And then, he spoke the words that stopped her dead in her tracks. "That homeless man you fed last night." Margaret's stomach dropped. That was me. Her mind went blank. What? The missing owner of the diner. Was that old man? Mr. Lancaster narrowed his eyes. "I disguised myself to see how my employees really treated people." He nodded slowly. "And your kindness spoke louder than Ethan's cruelty ever could." Margaret's eyes widened. This was a test. Lancaster stood up. "Ethan has been fired." Then, he made an offer that would change Margaret's life forever. "I want you to be the new manager of this diner." Margaret couldn't believe it. Yesterday, she had been thrown out of this place. And today, she was being asked to run it. She took a deep breath. It was time to leave her doubts behind. Lifting her chin, she answered with confidence. "Yes. I'll bring this diner back to what it was meant to be." And that day, Margaret didn't just win back a job. She won the greatest victory of her life.